Kia ora, hello and welcome. This week, what kind of difference can David Cunliffe really make? Well, this month's going to be a testing time for Labour's new leader. He needs to get more traction in the polls now his honeymoon burst is over. He needs a convincing Labour win in the Christchurch East by-election, where his party's defending its hold on a seat that's lost a lot of Labour voters since the big quakes. And he needs to ensure that the citizens-initiated referendum on state asset share sales doesn't turn into a fizzer. Above all, he needs to prove he can do a better job than John Key in leading the next government of New Zealand. So, is he up to the challenge? David Cunliffe joins me now. David Cunliffe, welcome back.
Thank you, great to be back.
Tell me, to start off with, what, in your view, are the top three issues that will actually determine the outcome of this election next year?
I think who can build an economy that's good for all Kiwis? Who can create a fair and just society, not a divided nation? And who can give us some pride in being New Zealanders, our environment, our culture, to restore the Kiwi dream.
That sounds like a message you used on the leadership trail.
That's what we're trying to do, and I think that's what Kiwis want.
Okay. What do you see as the critical difference in the approach to these goals, which I have to say I could have heard from John Key?
Well, I think the evidence is different. I think increasingly the evidence is that Mr. Key's government are governing for the big end of town, for the wealthiest and most powerful few, and not for most New Zealanders. That's sad, but it has been borne out repeatedly, firstly in their slavish adherence to free market economics, so-called, and as if that failed experiment in neoliberalism wasn't dead enough after the global financial crisis, their insistence on tilting the playing field further for the big end of town. And we've all seen the litany of shame, the casino deals, the movie deals, which they present as job creation, but the rest of the business community even says, hang on, there shouldn't be two sets of rules around here, one for Mr. Key's mates and one for everybody else.
Well, hold on. Let me just go through that, because you're not ahead in the polls. The economic growth projections for New Zealand are in fact among the top 5 nations of the world in terms of the recent IMF assessment. Employment growth is up. Unemployment is down. Business confidence is up. Farmer confidence is up. Building consents are up. Consumer confidence and consumer spending are both up.
Well,
it doesn't sound like the tide is all running the wrong way.
Oh no, you would expect 5 years after a great recession that we would be on the rebound, and you'd absolutely expect that when you have a $40 billion Christchurch recovery cheque to spend, that every single person in this country who could be working should be working. Now, actually, David, if I can, no, David, if you can, hang on, if you've raised a number of issues.
No, I didn't. I raised the matter of general confidence in the future of the economy on the current settings.
And employment levels, and it's appropriate then to deal with the question of employment. At 6.2%, which is the latest numbers, unemployment is stubbornly high. It is far higher now than the worst case outlook of the Treasury in, for example, the 2009-2010 budgets. And it is a failure of government policy that they are importing thousands of workers for the Christchurch rebuild at the same time that we have, for example, 15,000 unemployed people in Canterbury alone, let alone the very high rates of unemployment in many of our regions, like Northland, like East Coast, even places like Shannon in the Horowhenua, where I was recently, where a tannery has closed and the government washes its hands of it, and a whole town has been gutted. So growth is uneven. I think even the government would admit that.
Want to talk about
employment
Taranaki?
Growth? Yeah, Taranaki's lucky. It's got a few drill holes offshore. But we all know that New Zealand's future is not just purely an extractive one, and that's a very important debate between the current government and the next one. Yeah. We are not prepared to see New Zealand just as a farm or a mine or an oil well. We want us to be about smart, renewable business that creates good jobs, that creates value, that retains value onshore, and that shares value more evenly amongst our community so that every Kiwi
I've been
kid gets a
hearing
chance.
about the knowledge wave for more than a decade now, and about all the smart industries that New Zealand can have, and I see that there are some, I know there are some. At the same time, aren't you ignoring some of the backbone strengths of the New Zealand economy when you say it's not just about farming? That's very dismissive of a major element of the economy.
No, I'm not meaning to dismiss our primary sector. I met this morning with Fonterra, and we talked about the journey that they are on from just thinking about volume to thinking about value. It's not an either or. I
would have thought they were thinking about safety.
They
should have been.
That's part of value. Having an international brand which stands up to scrutiny every time is partly how you create a brand premium that allows you to charge more for your product. That ultimately means both your shareholders and your employees get to earn more.
Do you think they've been smart enough?
I think they're trying. I don't think in all cases they have been.
That's not what I asked you.
No, they're not perfect. Nobody is.
Okay.
And they would be the first. I mean, their board report just recently made very clear that there's a whole lot of lessons that they can learn. You can't drop a torch in a milk powder vat and then decide to plumb a pipe from one vat to another so you can reprocess all the milk powder and then think you can apply the same cleaning techniques to a rubber hose that you can to a stainless steel vat.
Well, I'm sure that strange things happen in factories when they've got a production run on all over the place, but
well,
you're quite right.
But
let me ask you a more fundamental
economy.
question, which really goes to the heart of the whole issue. I would have thought that one of the world's major dairy processors and producers, but processors, would have had a certified testing facility which would actually determine whether or not one of the most dangerous potential threats to health could be present in their milk product.
You would expect them
Yes.
to have a regime.
Have you told them that?
Yes, they know that we think that. You wouldn't necessarily expect them to own the facility. They could contract the facility, but you would expect the actually, let me take one step further. The business of business is business, and you would hope that people are enlightened enough to know that if you're producing world-class food, you need world-class safety standards every time. They get that now. And to be fair to the chief executive, he had asked to be briefed on anything which showed any difference from that standard, and he wasn't, and action has been taken. So let's give the chief executive his due. But it is ultimately a matter for the government regulatory framework to require such standards as well. And there are still big questions to be asked about the interrelationship between Fonterra and the government's regulators.
I'll come back a little on some of that later, but let's revert to the core theme.
Sure.
The core differences, if you like, between National and Labour's approach. What does true red mean? When you talk about true red to the trade unions of New Zealand, what are you signalling?
I'm signalling that we will be a Labour government that is true to our ideals and values, and they are values that every human being is of the same ethical worth, and that therefore every human being deserves the opportunity to have a good start in life, to get a good education, to have the basics cared for by a safety net, and to be able to fully participate in society. And for the unions, I have committed to them that a Labour Party, a Labour government will be good to its word on things like raising the minimum wage, supporting the campaign for a living wage, protecting vulnerable workers, reversing the current government's employment law changes, restoring smokos and lunchtime, which are even under threat in the latest laws. And, you know, they take us at our words.
Not have a smoko.
Oh, well, I can't say that it applies to party leaders, David.
Yes, well, fine, but when you say true red, not light blue, when did Labour stop being true red?
Oh, I think in our past history, I'm not going to name dates or...
In your lifetime? In your political life?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of occasions where we were trying to get the right outcomes, but we danced too hard with the market, and the market outsmarted us.
Do you think you did that too? You were a minister?
Yeah, I don't think the Clark government was as guilty of that. I think the Clark government was a little incremental in changing some things, but it was basically going in the right direction. It was pretty well run. I think sometimes we have, and I know that you and I will want to talk about election strategy, I think we occasionally fallen prey to the simplification that elections are always about just winning the centre, and therefore the more centrist you are, the more likely to win you are.
Well,
and that's a gross oversimplification.
That may apply when you're absolutely sure that your left is going to get out of bed and go and vote on voting day.
Correct.
And that hasn't happened sometimes
Not for the last
in
two,
recent history.
Not for the last 2 elections, it hasn't. And last time was dreadful. Dreadful. Our lowest result in 30 years.
Okay. We know what you don't like about the government. You don't like their deals. You've referred to them already. The Warner Brothers Hobbit deal, the Sky...
The Hall of Shame.
Yeah, I'll complete the list of sins as you see them, because I want to carry it a bit forward.
Sure.
The Sky City Casino thing, the Rio Tinto TY Point smelter, the dependence on John Banks and Peter Dunn. You don't like, quite clearly, state asset shares. So.
That's right. I don't think most New Zealanders like those things either.
Well, we know what you don't like. What we are not clear about is exactly what you're going to do about them. Are you going to unpick each and every one of those deals?
No.
Why not?
Because the Hobbit movies have already been made.
Well, there may be another one. There may be another one, and there's a
Oh.
piece of law that was...
You said, are we going to unpick that deal?
Yeah.
On the Sky City deal, we've been pretty clear that we will regulate to prevent gambling harm. And let's just have a look and see how far that building has actually been built when we take office. If it's been built, we're not going to pull it down. If it hasn't been built, then there may be an opportunity to have another look at that contract and make sure that the process is one which even the Auditor General could accept, which certainly wasn't the case with the process that's occurred to date.
Fine.
TY Point, what a shabby deal from the government. A straight-out subsidy, corporate welfare to simply take it off the television screens until after the election. Devoid of strategy, devoid of a plan for Southland.
What's your strategy, though? What are you going to do? Are you going to keep a smelter in an industry where it looks like it'll be a hell of a long haul to make it economic? You're going to keep the people in those jobs,
are you saying
regardless of the cost of that facility and its real merits as an economic operation?
Are you saying you want the smelter or you don't want the smelter, David?
I'm asking you whether you would actually keep it in circumstances where its operator says it's uneconomic, we can't run it, we can't make a bob on it.
So the
Doesn't matter what you do about it.
The way I learn to negotiate is to firstly get all the facts on the table in an open and honest way, to work out what the goals and objectives of the various players are, to see if there's a way of giving a bit of a swap so that people get what they need that allows them to continue. But
the government would say that's exactly what we did.
And then you'd hope that they would have come up with a more creative solution than just writing a big fat cheque to put off the fateful day by a couple of years. The other part of the equation is you work out what your best alternative is. In this case, what's the best alternative to the smelter continuing? And the answer to that is you build a little line from the Manapuri grid to the main southern grid, and you put that power into the grid, and you create a new opportunity for an energy-rich Southland to grow new jobs in energy-intensive industries other than aluminium, and you bring down the price of power nationwide and you get jobs elsewhere.
And are you going to buy back the power companies or the shares in the power companies that have been sold off from state ownership?
We reserve the right to act in the public interest. We can't predict the future.
That doesn't answer my question. You're going to buy the shares back?
Possibly, possibly not. We're not ruling it in or out.
Well, you see, that's what I mean. We don't quite know what you're going to... We know what you don't like. We have no idea what you're really going to do about it. What kind of confidence do you think that builds?
Well, I hope it builds honesty and realism, because if you can predict the future, Mr. Beatson, then you're in the wrong job. You should be a bookmaker or a stockbroker.
I don't think I want either of those jobs. Thanks very much. If that's my future, I think I better try and do something else.
But you're doing very well as a broadcaster, but I don't think it's a fair question in all seriousness to ask a party leader before they take office and have access to all the books in the first place, and secondly in a dynamic environment, to give you certainty about whether an asset will be renationalised. It may be, as it was with Air New Zealand, as it was with
Well,
Kiwi.
all you do is create doubt, though, don't you?
Well, look, don't blame us. These assets should not have been sold. The ownership has been transferred from 100% of New Zealanders to, in Meridian's case, less than 2% of New Zealanders. And that is a great shame for the other 98 who've been robbed.
And if a lot of people come and say, look, I voted for you because you said you might buy back those assets, you should buy back those assets, But you're not going to now you've looked at the facts. Are you prepared to take that risk?
Well, I have been absolutely honest with New Zealanders, and you have just challenged me for being too upfront about the fact that I can't put a definite stake in the ground until I know what the facts are. Now you challenge me for being too definite. I think the questioner needs to make up his mind.
No. I'm allowed to
You're allowed
ask
to
you whether you beat your wife, you know.
and then
Is that a yes or a no?
yeah. You're allowed to ask me questions on both sides of the coin, and
absolutely.
I'm allowed to give you exactly the same answer.
Let me go to the other side of the coin. Labour's deals. You have spoken to the CTU. You've said youth wage will go, minimum wage will be increased, industry standards agreements will be part of our agenda, and there'll be a living wage for what you call core public
What a
service.
shocking idea that we should pay people enough that they could feed their families in a modest way. And in fact, the living wage is calculated on the basis of one full-time income
Well, I'm sorry,
plus
but you're
one
not giving it
household
to
income.
everybody, are you? You're actually giving it to core public servants
We're
who
supporting...
probably are not actually starving on
We're
the
giving it
corner, unable to bring up their children. I don't see too much of that around the public service.
Well, there are public servants earning less than the living wage, which is $18.40 an hour, and we are starting in a fiscally responsible way, leading by example, starting with those that we directly employ. The next stage is to move to Crown entities, including hospitals, schools, state aged care facilities, and again, as I've said all the way along, in a fiscally responsible way, spread that out through those institutions, and in parallel, clearly give preference in government procurement to those private sector employers who are prepared to be certified as living wage employers. And again, this is not a radical idea. This has been done in lots of other countries, including Britain and parts of Australia, to have people certified as being on a living wage. The alternative, and remember, as I say, this is about saying that a family with 2 kids ought to be able to feed them on the basis of a full-time job and the other parent doing a half-time job.
I remember rightly about how the living wage was actually calculated and constructed with a little more than just feeding your kids. It was actually a few other
paying
things
the
as
rent,
well. Yeah,
paying the power bill.
And having
The
a
power
computer
bill
in your
from those,
household and a...
the power bill from those, okay, so you don't think that poor people should be able to access the
Didn't
internet?
say that.
Well, be
Didn't
careful.
say that.
Be careful.
What I'm
because
saying,
computer's
what
not
I'm
a
saying
luxury.
to you is
You can't
that
look at the children of New Zealand and say,
being totally discriminatory in your approach, and that could possibly create a lot of resentment among the people who are excluded from your benevolence.
we are certainly seeking to roll the living wage out across the economy as far as we possibly can. But if I stood up here and said today, I can write the cheque for every single employee in the country to be receiving the living wage, you would rightly harangue me as a charlatan, because that would be a cheque I couldn't cash. I will not promise to write a cheque that I don't know I can cash. I know I can fund the core public service. I believe that over a short period of time we will be able to extend that to the broader state sector, and I believe we can create the incentives where a lot of employers who already believe that they are doing the right thing by paying a living wage, that
I
they will get
I hear you
incentives.
winning the state sector vote. I wonder, however, whether you've gone and tested all of this with the private sector, who would face up to significant cost increases
So this
on one hand, and secondly, who would then be seeking to recover them from the consuming public, who would be facing substantial price increases.
Well, let's not get too dramatic about this. You know, the the great thing about paying some of our poorest and most vulnerable families just a little more is, you know, they can't afford to save a lot, so they spend everything they earn. Look, I'm going to tell you a real life story. A woman I met yesterday, someone who's a mental health nurse, works very hard, is earning $525 a week net after tax, working 6 days a week, lives in Blockhouse Bay Road, pays $400 a week for rent. She tells me she has $125 a week to feed, clothe, heat, pay for the phone bill for herself and her children. She's working more than a full-time wage. She's earning less than she was on the DPB. She's working her guts out to do the right thing. Now, you can't tell me it's easy to feed a family on $125 a week. And when I hear stories like that, you know, I don't mind being accused of giving a hand to our poorest and most vulnerable families. I don't want to see anyone working for less than $15 an hour. I'd like to see everybody earning a little more. But we know that we have to grow the household budget at the same time that we grow value and productivity around the economy. We have to do both at the same time, and we will.
A number of commitments, and many of them will be presumably met by the taxpayer because we pay the payroll, right?
So?
And in addition to that, they may pay by way of inflation in the economy. Have you actually done all those commitments you've made and rolled out so far? Have you got an economic model that tells you what the cost is?
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
And more to the point, do you have a plan to recover that cost?
Yep, sure.
So that the government books don't go out the whack.
It's not that hard. Okay. We'll run a fiscal surplus. We would be running one in 2014-15. We'll run a fiscal surplus, I would anticipate, the first year that we're elected. And this is all fully costed. The cost of the living wage commitment that we've made to the core public services, $30 million. That's already built into the baseline.
Doesn't end there.
By the way, less, it's less, David, hang on a second, it's less than the corporate welfare that this government has showered upon the foreign owners of TY Point.
Will you have to increase any of the income tax rates that apply now to recover and keep the books in balance?
Our position is that we will raise the top tax rate, but only above a threshold where middle-income families are not affected. Last time round, that was only for people earning more than $150,000 a year, and I think that's less than 1% of New Zealanders.
Tell me now, what you're into a situation in which you have to start thinking about your coalitions. Can you wear the entire Green agenda?
Wouldn't want to.
What can't you wear?
I'm not going to go through their manifesto.
Why not? You say you wouldn't want to, then obviously, and you answered it very quickly.
Well, but guess what? I'm the leader of the Labour Party, and I'm here to push Labour Party policy and maximise the Labour Party vote. But what I won't do is I won't bash a potential coalition partner in the form of the Greens or the form of New Zealand First. They are entitled to campaign for their policies. They're different to ours. They believe in theirs, we believe in ours. The beauty of democracy is the public gets to choose.
To be sure, but you have to actually then start trading off with them when it comes to forming a coalition.
In the same way that Nationals had to trade off, God forbid, with the ACT Party.
I quite agree, but I don't know.
Or possibly even worse with some others who are lurking in the wings.
I still don't know where your bottom line is, where you would draw your bottom line and say, we can't go any further than that.
So I will give you some examples. We will not overturn the decision of the court, legally made, to approve a coal mine on the Denniston Plateau. We will, however, object to building a monorail around World Heritage Forest in Wakatipu. Those are two concrete examples. Now, in one case, National would probably do both, the Greens would do neither, and there is one which we believe, because of the legal process, is acceptable, and there is one which we think it is legitimate to stop.
Let me ask you, what's your attitude towards deep water drilling?
That's a
because
very
I would have
good
thought that that would be a crunch line issue, and you haven't mentioned it.
Well, I have mentioned it publicly. I mentioned it in my speech to the conference last weekend. The line is very clear, that we stand for best practice environment standards and clean-up standards, and they will be required to be proven before any consents are given. Now, that's not a moratorium, but I will say this, and I've said it before, that based on the currently available, publicly available information, I do not believe those thresholds have yet been reached. I will go slightly further and say, in particular, I think the EEZ legislation, under which that drilling is purporting to occur, is flawed and is an insufficient regulatory and legislative base to enable deep sea oil prospecting. It will need to be addressed.
Okay. Early? Because the drilling's starting
Early.
now.
Early.
Okay.
Early.
November will see you fighting war on two fronts. You said you wanted the party on a war footing. You've got it. You've got a by-election in Christchurch East, and at the same time you'll be promoting Labour's stance on state-owned assets in the referendum. Which one is going to be the most difficult fight?
Well, I don't know why that's a choice, because we aim to do very well in both. Can I just say on Christchurch East, I was down there yesterday working with our candidate and getting briefed by local stakeholders, and I was intrigued when, upon the announcement of the resignation of the current MP for Waimakariri, the national candidate for Christchurch East, Mr. Doozy, said that he was going to run in Waimakariri, which has earned him the nickname of "Any Seat Will Doozy." And to the people of Christchurch East, I say this: get yourself a candidate that actually wants to represent you and you alone. And I challenge Mr. Doozy to stand up in public and say whether he will run somewhere else. And if he won't, he should.
He is not here to defend himself. I'm sure.
Well, you just asked me which of these two would be the most difficult. It clearly won't be Christchurch East, because he's just committed political harikari.
I got to say, I'd have thought it might be, because at the end of September, the Christchurch Press conducted a poll in that electorate, found National held 42% had 42% support, and Labour had 27%. Not by any means cut and dried, is it?
No, it's not. And to be fair to your question, it's absolutely true that Labour starts behind here. The party vote in the electorate is currently with National. We had a very popular, long-serving and able MP in the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, who has since become the Mayor of Christchurch. And although she is very strongly supporting our candidate, Portal Williams, Portal, who is an excellent candidate, needs to get known. What I can tell you is that there is an army of people helping that to occur, and I believe that we will win that race. It won't be easy, but we will do it. And Mr. Any Seat Will Doozy's just made it a tad easier.
All right, let me talk about another contest that you have to win. David Cunliffe versus John Key. A gap which is even wider exists in the polling that's been done on that issue. How important is it to you that you cut that winning margin over the next few months?
Well, clearly I have to earn the respect and trust of New Zealanders because they are being asked to entrust me with a very serious responsibility, which is to lead and guide the country through unknown waters. I would further say that, I don't think Mr. Key is an evil bloke. This isn't personal against him. He's funnier than I am, but he's no strategist. And I think New Zealanders are getting very tired of, under his leadership, seeing a country where the rich are divided from the poor, where there is not one New Zealand but two, and where there's not one but two sets of rules. One for John Key's best mates at the big end of town and another for everybody else. So the message to New Zealanders is, if you want your country back, if you want good old-fashioned Kiwi values back, then you can do it by voting Labour, and I am very proud to lead a very fine team.
You're going to learn how to tell a joke?
Dryly.
David Cunliffe, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Labour Party leader and leader of the opposition, David Cunliffe. And that's the Beatson interview. We're back next week hoping to find out how Auckland's embattled mayor is getting back to business. Till then, thanks for your company, and bye for now.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.